All right, welcome back to Modern Martial Arts and Health Radio Podcast. It's been a year since I've done an episode. Um, it was never really intentional for me to be going this long, and um, I was just trying to line up an interview, I think, and just something fell off, and I just got busy with other type of stuff and things like that. So it was never really intentional, and I I always planned to come back to this and really start recording more podcasts. So I want to kind of start things back up again. What I want to start doing is really making podcasts that not just interviews, but like just talking about different topics, stuff like that, and really, really just kind of making sure that they kind of getting a voice out there and stuff like that. So what I want to do today is I really want to kind of go back to an article I wrote, and I'm gonna put this in the show notes, stuff like that, where you can go ahead and read over the original article, but I'm actually going to kind of read it and maybe add to it and stuff like that there. So the original article, which was actually initially written back in about 2015. And when I wrote it back in 2015, it was under a different blog site called internal MMA.blogs, and then eventually, once I started Ground Dragon Martial Arts, I actually moved the article over, even edited and added a couple things to it and stuff like that. But so I'm gonna go back. I'm actually gonna re-edit it, and this article, when I originally posted it, and every time I kind of repost it, people kind of get a little, they get a little upset, or they get, they really start a conversation with it. So it is actually, I think it's a really good article. But let's get into it here. So the article is called "Chinese Martial Artist Disgust of MMA," and as a Xingyi Chen Baguazhang Tai Chi Chuan practitioner, I love watching MMA, mixed martial arts. Um, the UFC started back in the mid 1990s, and I've enjoyed watching it from time to time. And currently, I do have to say that I probably don't watch it nearly as much as I used to. Partly because of time and stuff like that. It really kind of hampers the ability to sit down and kind of watch it. But I I've never really put the effort though into training or competing in MMA. I have preferred more of a stand up game, even though now I'm kind of starting to dedicate myself a little bit more to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and stuff like that. So, um, you know, I do like MMA. I like that mixed martial arts and stuff like that. But that being said, I also truly love traditional Chinese martial arts, and I've been enamored with it since I was a teenager. It's something that I've really enjoyed, and I train Xingyi Chuan Baguazhang and Sun style Tai Chi Chuan with mostly with Tim Cartmel. I've also dabbled in Xingyi Bagua and Tai Chi with other teachers, and just various styles and stuff like that. But what I really liked about Tim Cartmel is Tim Cartmel, from last I kind of asked him. He's a third degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and he trains and coaches MMA fighters. So, but he's also spent like 10, 11 years in China, Taiwan, particularly in the mid 80s to early to mid 90s. And he's just a vast source of information, stuff like that. Particularly when it comes to the Chinese martial arts. And I dabbled in things: Jeet Do, boxing, Sanda, Muay Thai, Savate, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, some of the Filipino martial arts to some degree. Um, and all of this really kind of contributed to what I consider to be a competent martial artist. But you know, let's just kind of set the record straight. I in no way think that I am a even a good martial art practitioner. Like I've had some people kind of accuse me of thinking that that I think of myself as being much better. That's not true. I just think there's too many people who are really terrible at it. But I, you know, I by far do not think I'm all that great at it myself. And really, it's just, it's just trying to, trying to stay humble, eat bitter, and really kind of put myself to, really work on getting better as a martial artist overall. And I don't expect to be an amazing fighter, and I really just kind of want to practice this stuff as a lifelong practice because I really love it. This kind of leads me to what this article really was about, and with that in mind, something really bothers me with the traditional Chinese martial arts community as it stands now, and this has changed. So, especially in the last 5-6 years since I originally wrote the article. A lot of things have changed, and people have started to open up into MMA in China quite a bit. We see that with the One Championship and things like that. But there's obviously still this kind of stigma, and there's just been kind of this feeling of refusing to accept that MMA is an effective sporting platform in which to test their skills with as little rules as possible for sanctioned sport within our current societal accepted morals. And what that means, that when we're in a fight and if we're in a real fight on the street, that it's there are no rules, but and I think I get a little bit into this again in the article, but this kind of gives a very safe platform to really practice fighting, and to kind of explore a very a way with very few limitations on fighting, and there are the rules aren't bad, if we back up a little bit, if we look back at the original UFCs, UFC 1, 2, 3, even I think 4, very few rules, if any. And it was kind of the same thing, that the traditional styles that talked about eye poking and throat grabbing, all this stuff like that were kind of allowed, still were not very effective against someone who knew how to set up and put you in a position where you did not have the power to do anything, and they did. So, this inability to accept MMA as an effective platform, it troubles me some, and in some sense, I I do understand that, like I said, from as a form of self defense combat standpoint, fighting on the ground is dangerous, and it can be deadly. No, nobody wants to go to the ground. No competent, effective jiu-jitsu teacher will ever tell you, you know, make sure you go to the ground when you're in a fight. Obviously, a lot of jiu-jitsu classes kind of go there, and there are some cultural reasons that, particularly in Brazil, from what I was told recently, actually, that the training areas in Brazil were very small, and the classes were very big. So there was a lot of people in a very small matted area. So it was very difficult to do jujitsu standing up. So it would often start on the knees, so you would focus more on the ground fighting. But that being said, that may have been common, but it was not essentially always the rule. They still talked about doing valetudo and stuff like that, and that always started from the feet, which is valetudo was the forerunner to what UFC started as, which eventually became mixed martial arts. And I think that there's a stigma especially within the Chinese ethnicities that train in martial arts. That ground fighting is something kind of dogs do. Like, a dog rolls around in the dirt and ground fights. That's kind of what they do. And a Chinese person doesn't want to be a dog. That type of thing. And then, and I've had Chinese people actually tell me this, that the MMA fighters are like beasts and animals and not human type of thing, which obviously we know is really silly. That's a silly thought and idea. But, coming back to it, the Chinese are not against wrestling and grappling. Look at Chinese wrestling. It is done exclusively on the feet. There's the rule set that pretty much if anything other than your feet touch the ground, you kind of lose. But which is fine. Shuai Jiao is fantastic. It's a fantastic martial art. It can add a lot of value to other TCMA, and there's historical evidence that a great deal of masters throughout several Chinese styles would train in Shuai Jiao in addition to their art. Even if we look at several of the forms of different styles, they technically only make sense in the context of Shuai Jiao. Like you see all these kind of people doing like double punches and stuff like that, and I think that would be really silly as a way to strike people. But when you frame in the context of Shuai Jiao, it may actually be a throw. So, and a lot of times what has happened, and I've had a friend who's kind of like an indoor disciple of a teacher in China, and he said that people would get levels of application. So, kind of like, punching, kicking is kind of like where the basic level is, and then you'll kind of move into more of like wrestling, throwing, grappling, and like chin gnaws with locks and things like that. DHA or pressure point stuff, probably bullshit and all in most sense of the word there. But to each their own. You're allowed to believe whatever you want to believe. Doesn't make it any more effective, but you can still believe in it. But when you're not getting a certain degree amount of the information to properly train the Chinese martial art, and this stuff is being hidden from you, not because it's necessarily a secret. There really are no secrets, but it's because either the teacher doesn't think you're ready for it, or doesn't think you're dedicated enough. But then the problem is these people eventually go on and they start teaching others, and it's passed down in this watered down fashion, stuff like that. So, and then people talk, then make it seem like, oh, well, that was a secret teaching and stuff like that. So, it wasn't a secret. You just didn't learn it. So, but going from that, like I train Bago Zhong amongst Qingyi and Taiji, and Bago Zhong has a lot of throws and a lot of takedowns, especially coming from any of the Cheng Tinghua lines, stuff like that. I specifically focus on Sun style Bago Zhong. Is Sun Lu Tong was a student of Cheng Tinghua in the late 1800s. I think in the article I put early 1900s. I should change that, but it was for a few years before Cheng died. Cheng Tinghua died in 1900 during the Boxer Rebellion, when he was trying to escape being forcibly put into some sort of workers' line by a German soldier. And Cheng Tinghua was a well-known Shuai Jiao expert practitioner before he started studying Bago Zhong under Dong Haichuan, or what would become known as Bago Zhong later. Dong was noted for teaching his students based on their knowledge of whatever martial art they had previously experienced. So, Cheng Tinghua, since he was a Shuai Jiao practitioner, was going to have a lot of knowledge in throwing, takedowns, wrestling, stuff like that. So, when you really kind of look at Cheng style Bagua, it's going to have a heavy influence in that type of stuff. At least it should. Now, obviously, there's going to be more striking and technique, stuff like that. And it's likely Cheng Tinghua was probably experienced in some of the more traditional striking techniques from Shuai Jiao as well, which aren't done so much anymore. You find them a little bit in Cheng Dong Sheng's lines that come from Taiwan. There was a bouting Shuai Jiao system. But I'm sure you wonder why. What does this have to do with my wonderment of why TCMA practitioners, traditional Chinese martial arts practitioners, dislike MMA? Well, when I examine traditional Chinese martial arts history from time to time, I find that such and such master fought late time matches and won. And knowing somewhat about these late time matches, especially for like Qingyi trend fighters, they often fought in these bouts which can be likened to MMA bouts. Today, sans the ground element, so they weren't fighting on the ground. Obviously, like I mentioned before, they didn't really like that stuff, so they wouldn't fight on the ground. By some accounts, these fights were quite brutal, sometimes involving the signing of death waivers, resulting in serious and permanent injury. So why is it that traditional Chinese martial art practitioners are so disturbed, generally speaking, by MMA? Is it cultural? Most likely. Perhaps. But I think it has more to do with the modernization of traditional Chinese martial arts for health back in the early mid-1900s. This kind of disdain for anything considered archaic or barbaric by the Chinese communists, as well as the introduction of the modern Wushu performance art. Now, you might be asking yourself, by now, what about Sanda, or also known as Sanshou? which is good combat sport practiced throughout the world. One, I have competed at a minor tournament level. Like I'm like 1 to 2. Oh, like 1 win, 2 losses. So like, and it might actually be worse than that. But that goes back to my thing. I've never thought I was that great of a fighter. I've never thought of good at any of this stuff. So, and maybe you don't either. But he, I love it. It interests me so much, and I love doing it. Yeah. Going back to Sanda, Sanda was originally developed in the 1950s by the Chinese Red Army, borrowing from its collective group of indigenous martial arts, boxing, probably some taekwondo, which I'm told is quite the rage all over China now. That these boxing gloves can kick, punch, and clinch where they are allowed to throw or take down, but they, like I said, don't go to the ground, just like China. They also score by knocking their opponent out of the ring, which comes from the Lei Tai traditions previously mentioned. All in all, it is a promising sport to aid in the development of future MMA fighters to a certain degree. The ground game, however, is an aspect still lacking in modern combative sports coming from China. And, this is really kind of something to really look into in terms of, whether that's changed now with like one championship, stuff like that, which, a lot of the CMA practitioners and stuff like that, or not necessarily CMA practitioners, but Chinese mixed martial artists are doing more, because I think it's based out of Asian culture. So, this is not to say that the Chinese have completely ignored ground fighting altogether. In fact, many arts, Xing Yi Chen being one of them, which has the ground dragon cannon, the Dong Jing, and I'm sorry for butcher Chinese, but what these do is they help to teach techniques, what to do when a fighter is knocked out. And it makes sense when one thinks about it, how things might have been in battle in ancient times, with weapons and swords and spears and stuff like that. The idea is that if you get knocked down, you want to, get up right away with an opponent standing over you, because you don't want to be stabbed or hacked to death. However, these methods are far from sophistication of modern jiu-jitsu or submission grappling, wrestling, stuff like that. This basic foundational stuff. You're learning far more advanced stuff nowadays within the first 6 months of jiu-jitsu than you are with these types of techniques, which are actually sometimes considered kind of the secret or advanced techniques, if they're taught at all. Most of the time they're not taught at all, and most of the time they don't even know about them. I think that, a lot of times they're a lot more common in Southern Chinese martial arts. You see some Hung or Lama Pai. They teach it kind of looks like breakdancing type of techniques, stuff like that. Traditional Chinese martial arts do have something called what we call Qin Na, which means Qin, which means seize, Na, which means control, and it's primarily standing submission grappling. To some extent, there's different components to it, but that's kind of like that's where the best general way to explain it nowadays. It sometimes uses submission wrestling, where a lock or a choke or some sort of trap technique is applied, and then the opponent is taken or thrown to the ground. Now, I was training with Tim one day, and he showed me a figure four lock. The arm was up, it was flexed and abducted about 90 degrees of the shoulder with the elbow bent. And this we were I believe we were going over pouch, and there's just a special technique, and it's kind of to do that special chin on. And I asked him, I said, Tim, when I'm doing standing and stuff, sometimes I have trouble applying it, you know, in an MMA, maybe an MMA, a standing MMA, component, and it makes it easier if I hit the person and then apply the grappling while they're distracted. And he told me that he knew about 300 chin on techniques, and I'm not misremembering that number. He said 300, and he said pretty much 6 are high percentage. The rest are almost worthless. Going back to like, okay, Dr. Troy, why is this relevant to traditional Chinese martial arts disgust of MMA? Well, it is a lot, because it doesn't make sense in light of the fact that martial artists of the 1800s enjoyed fighting. In fact, they cared more about fighting and less about the styles they used. It fascinates me as well that modern TCM, traditional Chinese martial arts practitioners, often demonstrate an arrogant attitude in which they feel traditional Chinese martial arts is somehow special when compared to other martial arts. There's also this attitude that MMA is not real fighting, and real fighting is only done on the streets. Well, I agree to this to some extent. I really do, and I also see traditional Chinese martial arts ignorance of MMA fighters' trainings and abilities. So, I think that I think if I had a hobbyist MMA fighter who was going 2 to 4 days a week, and a Chinese martial arts practitioner who was going 2 to 4 days a week, and they've been training about the same amount of time, I'd probably go with the MMA fighter. And especially if that traditional Chinese martial arts practitioner is not sparring, he's barely doing any partner drills, and whatever partner drills he's doing are not live partner drills, and they're more kind of dead, very kind of, there's no intention behind it, there's no energy behind it. And I don't mean energy in like a chi sense, I mean like there's no sense of like, I'm fighting someone. This is, I have to do this technique as a fight. Then, I'd rather be with the MMA fighter who's kind of training a lot, who's more focused on fighting, who's more focused on sparring, stuff like that. Does that mean the MMA fighter is going to do great during a fight? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that they're going to have the better ability to handle themselves in a stressful situation when attacked in a fight, and stuff like that. So, MMA may not be real fighting, but you won't get any more real than that unless you go pick a fight yourself. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we're gonna bring in more episodes soon. Have a good one.